April 15th, 1995, Dallas, Texas, Walker, Texas Ranger Soundstage. Producer Martin Kellerman had been untouchable for 20 years. That's exactly why he thought he could slap 19-year-old Tommy Martinez in front of 60 crew members. Frank Morrison watched it happen from the shadows. The kid reminded him of someone, the defiance in his eyes, the way he didn't back down even after the hit. Chuck Norris stepped between them before security could move. But Frank had already made his decision. He walked onto that set, grabbed Kellerman by the throat, and whispered something in his ear that made a grown man wet himself. "Guest, let's start with something personal. When you think back to that moment in 1995 on the Walker set, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Tony, Guest, you mentioned that Chuck whispered something about Kellerman that made your blood run cold. Can you walk us through exactly what happened after he stepped in? Guest, I'll never forget it, Tony. The whole soundstage went dead silent after Kellerman hit me. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the rafters, smell the sawdust from the set construction, mixed with that Texas heat seeping through the warehouse doors. Chuck didn't say a word at first. He just walked over, you know, that deliberate way he moved, like every step was calculated, and stared Kellerman down until the man actually took a step back. Tony, what was the crew doing during all this? Guest, frozen. Absolutely frozen. The camera operators, the grips, even the craft services lady stopped what she was doing. I remember seeing this older lighting technician, must have been in his 60s, shaking his head like he'd seen this kind of thing before. But Chuck, he didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just said, very quietly, "Vincent, that's enough." Then he turned to me and said, "Son, come with me." Tony, where did he take you? Guest, to his trailer. I was still shaking, still had that metallic taste in my mouth from the adrenaline. Chuck poured himself some coffee from this old thermos. I can still smell it, that bitter black coffee mixed with the leather scent of his jacket hanging on a hook. He sat down across from me and just studied my face for what felt like an eternity. Tony, what was going through your mind at that moment? Guest, honestly, I thought my career was over before it started. Here I was, this kid from East LA, son of a mechanic and a seamstress, and I'd just caused a scene on a major television production. I kept thinking about my mother, how proud she was when I got this job. She'd been working double shifts at the garment factory to help me pay for acting classes. Tony, but Chuck had something else on his mind. Guest, that's when things got strange, Tony. He leaned forward and said, "Marcus, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The way he said my name, it wasn't like the friendly Chuck Norris everyone knew. This was different, serious, almost grim. Tony, what did he tell you? Guest, he said, "Vincent Kellerman isn't just an abusive producer. He's part of something much bigger, much darker. There are men in this industry who use their power for things that would make your stomach turn." Then he paused, looked out the small trailer window toward where Kellerman was still standing on set, and said, "I've been watching him for months." Tony, watching him? What did he mean by that? Guess that's exactly what I asked Tony, and Chuck's answer is what's haunted me for 28 years. He said, "There's a network of powerful men in Hollywood and beyond who think they're untouchable. They prey on young actors, especially kids from backgrounds like yours, hungry, desperate, willing to do anything for a break. Kellerman is one of their recruiters." Tony, a recruiter. That's a chilling word choice. Guest, Chuck explained that these men would identify vulnerable young talent, put them in compromising situations, and then use those situations to control them for years, sometimes decades. He said they had judges, politicians, other producers, even some law enforcement in their pocket. A whole system designed to silence anyone who tried to speak out. Tony, how did you react to hearing this? Guest, I felt sick, Tony, literally sick. I remember my hands started trembling again, but for a completely different reason than before. Chuck must have seen the color drain from my face because he reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Son, I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you almost walked into, and more importantly, what I'm about to do about it." Tony, what was he planning to do? Guess that's when Chuck told me something that still gives me chills. He said justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms, Marcus. Sometimes it happens in ways that can't
To his education. Chuck personally made sure I got paid for the full season, even though I only worked those few days. And true to his word, within 2 weeks I had auditions lined up with 3 different casting directors who specifically mentioned that Chuck Norris had recommended me.
So Chuck kept his promise about your career.
He did more than that, Tony. Over the next few years, whenever I booked a job, I'd get a call from Chuck checking in on me. Never anything dramatic, just casual conversations, asking how I was being treated, if I felt safe on set, if anyone was making me uncomfortable. It was like he'd appointed himself as my unofficial guardian.
Did you ever ask him directly about what happened to Kellerman?
I tried once, about 2 years later. I was working on a small independent film in Austin, and Chuck happened to be in town for some martial arts event. He took me to dinner at this little Mexican restaurant, reminded me of the places my family used to go when I was growing up. I finally worked up the courage to ask him what he'd said to Kellerman that day.
How did he respond?
Chuck set down his fork and looked at me with those intense blue eyes of his. He said, "Marcus, there are some questions that are better left unasked, and some answers that are better left unknown. What matters is that you're safe, you're working, and you're becoming the man and artist you're meant to be. The rest is just noise."
But that wasn't enough for you.
Not really, no. I kept following industry news, waiting to see what Kellerman would do next. And here's the thing, Tony, he just vanished from Hollywood, completely. His production company dissolved within 6 months. His development deals evaporated. It was like he never existed.
That must have raised some red flags.
You'd think so, but back then the internet wasn't what it is now. Information didn't travel as fast, and industry news was much more controlled by the major publications. If Variety or The Hollywood Reporter didn't cover something, it might as well not have happened. I asked around discreetly, but people either claimed they'd never heard of Kellerman or changed the subject quickly.
Fast forward to last month when you found out about Kellerman's death. What went through your mind?
Terror, Tony. Absolute terror. Because the first thing I thought wasn't, how did he die, or where has he been all these years? The first thing I thought was, what did Chuck actually do? And then I realized I might have been naive for 28 years about who my mentor really was.
The package you mentioned, with the scripts, when did that arrive?
3 days after the news broke about Kellerman's body being found. I was in my home office in the Hollywood Hills, working on post-production for my latest film, when my assistant brought in this unmarked package. No return address, no postmark I could read clearly. Inside were 5 Walker, Texas Ranger scripts, and every single page had my name written in what looked like red ink.
What was your first instinct?
To call Chuck. But here's the problem, Tony. I haven't spoken to Chuck Norris in over 15 years. Our conversations became less frequent as I got more established in my career, and eventually they stopped altogether. I wasn't even sure how to reach him anymore.
Did you try?
I spent 2 days tracking down current contact information. When I finally reached someone in his representation, they told me Chuck wasn't taking calls about industry matters and suggested I speak with his attorney if I had legal concerns. That response scared me even more than the bloody scripts.
Why do you think you're being targeted now, after all these years?
That's what keeps me awake at night, Tony. Either someone wants me to know the truth about what Chuck did to protect me, or someone wants me to pay for being protected. Either way, I'm starting to realize that my entire career, everything I've accomplished, might be built on something much darker than I ever imagined.
And that changes everything.
Everything, Tony. Because if Chuck Norris isn't the hero I thought he was, then I need to figure out who I really am, and what I might owe for 28 years of success.
Tony, Guest, when you say you might owe something for 28 years of success, what exactly do you mean by that? Guest, I've been thinking about this constantly since I got those scripts, Tony. Every major break I've had, every door that opened when others were shut out, was it really my talent, or was it Chuck's influence? And if it was Chuck's influence, what was the cost? Not to me, but to people like Kellerman? Tony, you're questioning whether your entire career was built on someone else's suffering. Guest, exactly. I remember this one audition in 1997 for a studio picture that launched my directing career. I walked into that room and the producer immediately lit up when he saw my name. He said, "Oh, you're the young man Chuck Norris recommended. I got the job before I even finished reading. At the time, I thought I was just lucky to have such a powerful mentor. Tony, but now you're wondering if there was more to it." Guess, Tony, what if that producer hired me not because Chuck recommended me, but because Chuck had leverage over him? What if all those doors opened because people were afraid to say no to Chuck Norris? The martial arts legend, the action star, the man who could apparently make problems disappear? Tony, that's a heavy burden to carry. Have you looked back at any of the other people you worked with over the years? Guessed, that's what's really eating at me. I started doing research after I got the package. 3 of the producers who gave me early opportunities in the late 90s, they all had connections to that same Hollywood network Chuck warned me about. One of them was investigated by the FBI in 2003 for financial irregularities, but the case was dropped. Another one just vanished from the industry around 2001, sold his house in Malibu, and moved to some remote ranch in Montana. Tony, you think Chuck was systematically targeting these people? Guessed I don't know what to think anymore, Tony. But here's what really scares me. I never questioned any of it. For 28 years, I just accepted that I was talented and hardworking and deserving of success. I never asked why certain people went out of their way to help me, or why some of them seemed nervous when they mentioned Chuck's name. Tony, tell me about those scripts again. Was there anything else in the package besides your name written in red ink? Guessed? I've been over them 100 times with a magnifying glass, Tony. They're actual Walker scripts from that 1995 season, not copies. The paper has that aged feel, and I can smell the musty scent of old filing cabinets on them. But someone went through every single page and carefully wrote Marcus Rivera in what looks like blood-red ink wherever there was white space, in the margins, between lines of dialogue, even over some of the stage directions. Tony, that level of detail suggests someone with serious time and motivation. Any theories about who sent them? Guessed. That's what keeps me up at night, Tony. It could be someone from Kellerman's network who knows what Chuck did and wants revenge. Or it could be someone who was there that day on set. Someone who's been carrying this secret for 3 decades and finally decided I needed to know the truth. Tony, you mentioned that older lighting technician who seemed unsurprised by the whole situation. Did you ever try to track him down? Guessed. I've been thinking about him constantly. I never got his name, but I remember he had these weathered hands and a small scar above his left eyebrow. He worked on sets like he'd been doing it forever. If anyone would remember what really happened that day, it would be someone like him. Tony, the crew members from those productions, they'd be retirement age now if they're still alive. Guessed, exactly. And people that age, Tony, they start thinking about legacy, about unfinished business. Maybe someone decided it was time for me to understand what my success really cost. Or maybe they're worried about taking secrets to their graves. Tony, when Chuck told you that justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms, that bad men sometimes just disappear, do you think he was speaking from experience? Guessed. That's the question that haunts me most, Tony. Chuck Norris was a martial arts champion, a military veteran, someone who understood violence in ways most people never do. When he said those words, there was a certainty in his voice that suggested he wasn't talking theoretically. Tony, you've had almost 30 years to process that conversation. Looking back now, were there any other signs that Chuck might have been involved in something beyond just mentoring young actors? Guessed. There were little things that didn't make sense at the time, Tony. Like how he always seemed to know things about people before they became public knowledge. I remember him warning me away from a particular agent in 1999, said the man had personal problems that might affect his clients. 6 months later, that agent was arrested for embezzlement and drug possession. Tony, that could just be good industry intelligence. Guessed, maybe. But there was also the way certain conversations would just stop when Chuck entered a room. I noticed it at industry events, rap parties, even casual dinners. People would be talking and laughing, and then Chuck would appear and suddenly everyone was very focused on their drinks. Tony, fear or respect? Guessed I always assumed it was respect, Tony. Chuck Norris commands that kind of presence. But now I'm wondering if it was something else entirely. If people knew things about him that I was too naive or too grateful to see. Tony, what about his other protégés? Did Chuck mentor other young actors the way he mentored you? Guest, that's another piece that doesn't fit, Tony. As far as I know, I was the only one. And trust me, over the years I've met plenty of actors who would have killed for that kind of connection. But Chuck never mentioned anyone else, and I never heard stories about him taking other young performers under his wing. Tony, which makes you unique, and potentially more valuable as a witness to whatever happened. Guest, or more dangerous, to whoever sent those scripts. Because if Chuck really did eliminate people who threatened young actors, and if I'm the only person who knows the details of how it started, then I'm either a witness who needs to be silenced or an accomplice who needs to be exposed. Tony, have you considered going to the authorities with what you know? Guest, with what, Tony? A 28-year-old conversation and some bloody scripts from an anonymous sender? I don't even know if a crime was committed. Kellerman could have died of natural causes in that canyon. The scripts could be from some obsessed fan or someone playing an elaborate prank. Tony, but you don't believe that. Guest, no, I don't. Because there's one more thing I haven't told you, Tony. When I was going through those scripts, I found something tucked between the pages of the last one. A small piece of paper with an address written in the same red ink. It's a location in Fort Worth, Texas, about 20 miles from where we filmed Walker. Tony, have you looked up the address? Guest, it's an abandoned warehouse district, Tony. The kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. And according to property records, one of those warehouses was leased by a shell company from 1995 to 2023. 28 years, Tony. The exact amount of time between that day on set and Kellerman's death. Tony, someone's been waiting a long time to tell this story. Guest, or waiting a long time for the right moment to finish it. And I'm starting to think that moment is now. Tony, when you say finish it, Guest, what do you think that means exactly? Finish what? Guest, that's what terrifies me, Tony. I keep thinking about that warehouse lease ending in 2023, right around the time Kellerman's body was discovered. That's not a coincidence. Someone has been maintaining that location for 28 years, paying rent on an empty building, waiting for something. Tony, you think Chuck was using that warehouse for something all these years? Guest, I don't know, but I keep remembering details from that day that didn't seem important at the time. Like when Chuck came back from escorting Kellerman off set, I noticed his boots were dusty in a way that didn't match the soundstage floor, and there was this smell on his clothes. Not just Texas heat and dust, but something metallic, like old machinery or rusted metal. Tony, the kind of smell you might find in an abandoned warehouse. Guest, exactly. And here's another thing that's been eating at me. Chuck's phone call that evening. I was staying at this little motel about 10 minutes from the set, and around midnight I heard his voice outside my window. He was talking to someone, and I caught fragments of the conversation. Something about taking care of the situation permanently and making sure it never happens again to any kid. Tony, did you see who he was talking to? Guest, that's just it, Tony. When I looked out the window, Chuck was alone. He was pacing in the parking lot with that same chunky cell phone Kellerman had been using earlier, but the way he was talking, the intensity of his voice, it sounded like he was giving orders to someone, not having a conversation. Tony, orders about what to do with Kellerman? Guest, I didn't want to think about it back then, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Chuck kept saying the location is secure and no one will think to look there. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. 28 years should be long enough for people to forget, and for the boy to understand what he owes. Tony, Guest, are you saying Chuck was planning this from the very beginning? Planning to keep Kellerman somewhere for 28 years? Guest, Tony, what if Kellerman never left Texas that day? What if Chuck didn't just make him disappear from Hollywood? What if he made him disappear completely? And what if that warehouse was where he's been all this time? Tony, that's a serious accusation. You're talking about kidnapping, false imprisonment. Guest, or worse, Tony. I keep thinking about the way Chuck talked about justice, about how bad men just disappear. What if Kellerman has been dead since 1995 and someone just moved his body to that canyon to make it look like a recent death? What if the whole timeline we've been assuming is wrong? Tony, but the authorities would have determined time of death, cause of death. Guessed, would they though? 28 years in the Texas heat, in some abandoned warehouse, there might not be much left to examine. And if the body was moved recently to a location where it could be found, the physical evidence might be completely compromised. Tony, so why reveal it now? Why send you those scripts and that address? Guest, that's what I've been trying to figure out, Tony. Chuck is 83 years old now. Maybe he's sick, maybe he's dying and he wants to clear his conscience. Or maybe he wants me to understand the full scope of what he did to protect me so I'll be prepared to carry that burden. Tony, carry what burden? Guest, the knowledge, Tony. The truth about how my career really started and what it cost. Maybe Chuck sees me as his successor, someone who needs to understand how this kind of justice really works. Think about it. I'm successful now. I have influence in Hollywood. I could theoretically continue what he started. Tony, you think he's grooming you to become some kind of vigilante? Guest, I think he's been grooming me my whole career, Tony. Every check-in call, every piece of advice, every door that opened, it was all preparation for this moment. For when I'd be powerful enough to make a difference and old enough to understand that sometimes the system doesn't work. Tony, but you're a director, Guest, not a martial arts expert or military veteran. What could Chuck possibly expect you to do? Guest, information is power in Hollywood, Tony. I know things about people now, just like Chuck did. I know which executives have gambling problems, which ones have been accused of harassment, which ones have financial irregularities in their deals. If I wanted to make someone's life difficult, I could probably do it without ever throwing a punch. Tony, the way Chuck made things difficult for those producers who helped your career. Guest, exactly. And maybe that's what those scripts are really about. Not punishment, but recruitment. Maybe whoever sent them wants me to know that I've been part of this system all along, and now it's time to step up and take a more active role. Tony, that's a terrifying thought. Do you think you could do something like that? Use your position to target people you thought deserved it? Guest, 6 months ago I would have said absolutely not, Tony. But now, thinking about 18-year-old me standing on that set, trembling and humiliated, thinking about all the other young actors who might have faced worse from men like Kellerman, I'm not sure anymore. Tony, what's changed? Guest, I became a father, Tony. My daughter just turned 17 and she wants to be an actress. When I think about her walking onto a set and facing what I faced, or worse, when I imagine some powerful man putting his hands on her the way Kellerman put his hands on me, I understand Chuck's rage in a way I never did before. Tony, so the idea of taking justice into your own hands doesn't seem as foreign anymore. Guess the system failed me, Tony. If Chuck hadn't been there that day, if he hadn't intervened, what would have happened to me? How many other kids were hurt by Kellerman over the years? How many are being hurt right now by men just like him? Tony, but there's a difference between intervention and what you're describing. Guest, is there though? Chuck intervened, and Kellerman never hurt another young actor again. Results matter, Tony. And sometimes the only way to get results is to step outside the system that enables these predators in the first place. Tony, you sound like you're trying to convince yourself of something. Guest, maybe I am. Because tomorrow morning, I'm flying to Fort Worth. I'm going to find that warehouse, and I'm going to see what's really been hidden there for 28 years. And then I'm going to decide what kind of man I want to be for the rest of my life. Tony, that sounds incredibly dangerous. What if whoever sent you those scripts is waiting for you there? Guest. Then maybe it's time to finish what Chuck started, Tony. Maybe it's time for me to understand what I really owe for 28 years of success, and what I'm willing to pay to keep other kids safe. Tony, and if you're wrong about all this, if Chuck was just a mentor who helped your career through legitimate means, Guest, then I'll know I'm just a paranoid middle-aged man who let his imagination run wild, Tony. But if I'm right, if I find evidence that Chuck has been dispensing his own brand of justice for 3 decades, then I'll finally understand who my real mentor was, and what he's been preparing me to become. Guest, that's the question that's been keeping me awake, Tony. Part of me wants to call the police immediately, turn over everything I know, let the system handle it. But another part of me thinks about all the young actors Chuck might have protected over the years, all the predators who might have been stopped before they could hurt more kids. Tony, you're talking about being complicit in covering up what could be murder. Guest, am I though? Or am I talking about understanding that sometimes justice happens outside courtrooms? Chuck didn't create this problem, Tony. Hollywood's been protecting abusers for decades. If he found a way to actually stop them instead of just moving them around like chess pieces, maybe that's not the real crime here. Tony, but Guest, you're a father now. How do you explain something like this to your daughter someday? That your success came from someone else's death? You know what's Guest? Long pause. You know what scares me more than that conversation, Tony? The conversation where I have to tell her that I knew powerful men were hurting young actors and I did nothing to stop it, that I was so comfortable with my success that I never questioned where it came from or what it cost. Tony, have you tried reaching out to Chuck directly, asking him about any of this? Guest, I called his publicist yesterday, Tony. They said Chuck's been in declining health for the past few months, not taking meetings or doing interviews. But here's the strange part. When I mentioned my name, there was this long silence, and then the publicist said Chuck had left specific instructions that if I ever called, I should be given a direct number to reach him. Tony, did you call it? Guest, I dialed it 3 times and hung up before it could ring, Tony. Because once I have that conversation, once I ask Chuck directly what happened to Kellerman, there's no going back. Either he confirms my worst fears, or he thinks I've lost my mind and our entire relationship changes forever. Tony, what do you think he would say if you did call? Guest, I think he'd ask me if I'm ready to hear the truth, Tony. And honestly, I'm not sure I am. For 28 years, I've been able to tell myself that I earned everything through talent and hard work. If Chuck tells me that my career was built on Kellerman's disappearance, how do I live with that knowledge? Tony, on the other hand, if he tells you that everything was legitimate, that he just scared Kellerman into leaving Hollywood through legal means, Guest, then I'll know I've been torturing myself over nothing, and I can go back to my life. But Tony, deep down, I don't think that's what happened. There were too many strange details, too many pieces that don't fit the official story. Tony, tell me about your flight to Fort Worth. Have you made any specific plans once you get there? Guest, I land at DFW tomorrow at 2 p.m., Tony. I've rented a car and I've got the address memorized. The warehouse district is about 40 minutes from the airport, depending on traffic. I'm planning to drive by first, see what the area looks like, maybe talk to some of the other business owners nearby. Tony, you're going alone? Guest, I thought about bringing someone, Tony, but who do you bring to something like this? My wife thinks I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. My agent would have me committed if he knew what I was really thinking. And I can't risk involving anyone else in case I'm right about what I might find. Tony, have you considered that this could be a setup? That someone wants you in that specific location for reasons that have nothing to do with uncovering the truth? Guest, every rational part of my brain has considered that, Tony. Maybe someone from Kellerman's network knows what Chuck did and wants revenge. Maybe they've been waiting 28 years for the right moment to make me pay for my role in whatever happened. Tony, but you're going anyway. Guest, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering, Tony, looking at my daughter and not knowing whether the opportunities I can provide for her came from talent or from blood. Looking in the mirror and not knowing whether I'm a successful director or just someone who benefited from another man's death. Tony, what will you do if you get to the warehouse and find evidence that Kellerman died there? Physical proof that Chuck killed him? Guest, I honestly don't know, Tony. The right thing would be to call the authorities immediately, let them handle the investigation. But then I think about Chuck, 83 years old and in declining health. Do I really want to spend his final years putting him in prison for protecting me from a predator? Tony, you're weighing Chuck's life against Kellerman's. That's not a decision you should have to make alone. Guest, but it is the decision I have to make, Tony. Because I'm the only one who knows the full story. I'm the only witness to what happened that day on set, the only person who heard Chuck's phone call, the only one who received those bloody scripts. If I don't act on this information, no one will. Tony, have you thought about what happens to your career if this becomes public? If the story breaks that your success was connected to someone's disappearance? Guest, my career would be over, Tony. Even if I wasn't directly involved, even if I was just an innocent 18-year-old who got caught up in something beyond my control, Hollywood doesn't forgive that kind of association. I'd be radioactive. Tony, and your family? Your daughter's acting ambitions? Guest, she'd probably have to change her name, Tony. Start completely over with no family connections to help her. In some ways, that might be better. She'd know that everything she achieved was truly her own. But it would also mean destroying the life we've built. the security I've been able to provide. Tony, so you're risking everything on a 28-year-old mystery that might not even have the answers you're looking for. Guest, I'm risking everything on the chance that I might finally understand who I really am, Tony. Whether I'm a man who built his success on talent and hard work, or someone who's been living off another man's death for 3 decades. And whether I'm brave enough to face the truth, whatever it turns out to be. Tony, when you get back from Fort Worth, assuming you do get back safely, how will you know what the right choice is? How will you decide what to do with whatever you find? Guest, I think I'll know in the moment, Tony. Standing in that warehouse, seeing whatever Chuck left there, I think the choice will become clear. Either I'll find nothing and realize I've been chasing shadows, or I'll find something that changes everything I thought I knew about my life. Tony, and if it changes everything, Guest, then I'll finally understand what Chuck meant when he said that sometimes justice doesn't happen in courtrooms, Tony. And I'll have to decide whether I'm willing to become the kind of man who can live with that knowledge, or if I'm brave enough to do something about it. Tony, Guest, I need to stop you right there. What you just said about doing something about it, that sounds like you're already making peace with the idea that Chuck might have killed Kellerman. Are you hearing yourself? Guest, pause. I'm hearing a man who spent 28 years benefiting from something he never fully understood, Tony. And maybe it's time I stop being naive about how the world really works. Tony, but there's a difference between understanding harsh realities and actively participating in them. You're talking about potentially covering up a murder. Guest, am I covering it up, or am I choosing not to destroy an old man who protected me when no one else would? Tony, if Chuck did kill Kellerman, he didn't do it for money or fame or power. He did it to stop a predator from hurting more kids. Tony, that's still murder, Guest. That's still taking a life, regardless of the motivation. Guest, and how many lives did it save, Tony? How many 18-year-old kids didn't get humiliated, didn't get abused, didn't get their dreams crushed because Kellerman wasn't around to do it anymore? Tony, you can't know that. You can't quantify hypothetical victims against one actual death. Guess, can't I? Tony, in the 28 years since Kellerman disappeared, I've never heard another story about him. No other young actors coming forward with abuse allegations, no whispered warnings passed around casting offices. For a man who was clearly a predator, that silence is deafening. Tony, or maybe he just left Hollywood and found other victims somewhere else. Maybe Chuck didn't solve anything. Maybe he just moved the problem. Guest, long pause. I hadn't considered that possibility, Tony. What if Kellerman didn't die in 1995? What if Chuck really did just scare him away from Hollywood and he spent the last 20 to 8 years hurting people in other industries, other cities? Tony, now you're starting to see why vigilante justice is so problematic, Guest. You can't control all the variables. You can't guarantee the outcome you want, Guest, but you can guarantee the outcome you get when you do nothing, Tony. And that outcome is that powerful predators keep hurting vulnerable people while the system protects them. At least Chuck tried to do something. Tony, so what happens tomorrow? You get on that plane, you drive to that warehouse, and then what? Walk me through what you think you'll actually find there. Guest, honestly, Tony, I keep imagining different scenarios. Maybe I'll find nothing, just an empty building that Chuck used for storage or as an investment. Maybe I'll find evidence that he kept Kellerman prisoner there for years before he finally died. Or maybe I'll find Kellerman himself, still alive, still being held captive after nearly 3 decades. Tony, Guest, that last possibility, if Kellerman is still alive, if you find him imprisoned in that warehouse, what would you do? Guest, very long pause. That's the scenario that terrifies me most, Tony, because if I find Kellerman alive, I have to call the police immediately. There's no moral ambiguity there, no question about justice versus revenge. That would just be a crime. Tony, but you're hesitating. Why are you hesitating? Guest, because what if he tells me about other victims, Tony? What if he admits to decades of abuse? What if he's completely unrepentant about what he did to me and others? What if I'm standing there looking at a man who destroyed lives and Chuck is the only reason he couldn't destroy more? Tony, you'd still have to make the call, Guest. You'd still have to let the system handle it. Guest, would I though? What if Chuck appears while I'm there? What if this whole thing is some kind of test and he wants to see whether I'll choose the legal system that failed to protect me or the personal justice that actually worked? Tony, you're talking about a choice between right and wrong, Guest, not between 2 different kinds of right. Guest, am I, Tony? Because from where I'm sitting, the legal system that would have let Kellerman continue abusing young actors seems pretty wrong too. At least Chuck's approach had results. Tony, results that may have included murder. Guest, results that definitely included you living 28 years of your life based on a lie. Guest, what if it wasn't a lie though, Tony? What if Chuck saw something in me that day, some genuine talent worth protecting? What if Kellerman's removal just gave me the space to develop that talent without being destroyed first? Tony, you're trying to rationalize something that might be irrational. Guest, you're trying to find a version of this story where you're not complicit in something terrible. Guest, maybe I am, Tony. But I'm also trying to find a version where an old man who protected me doesn't spend his final years in prison, where my daughter doesn't have to live with the shame of her father's connection to a decades-old murder, where I can look in the mirror and still recognize the person staring back at me. Tony, and if you can't find that version, if the truth is just ugly and complicated and doesn't offer you any clean choices, Guest, then I guess I'll learn what kind of man I really am, Tony. Whether I'm someone who can live with ugly truths or someone who breaks under the weight of them. Tomorrow, in that warehouse, I'll find out which one Chuck Norris has been training me to become all these years. Guest, haven't I though, Tony? Every time I've faced a difficult decision in my career, every time I've had to choose between what's profitable and what's right, I've heard his voice in my head. The way he spoke that day about justice happening outside courtrooms, that's shaped how I've approached everything. Tony, give me an example. How has Chuck's influence affected your directing choices? Guest, 3 years ago, Tony, I was offered a big-budget action film. Huge money, career-defining opportunity. But during pre-production, I learned that one of the producers had multiple harassment allegations against him. Nothing proven in court, just whispered stories from actresses who were too scared to go public. Tony, what did you do? Guest, I walked away from the project, Tony. $20 million, just gone. My agent thought I'd lost my mind. But I kept hearing Chuck's voice asking me what kind of man I wanted to be, whether I was willing to profit from someone else's pain. Tony, that sounds like you made the ethical choice based on your own moral compass, Guest. You don't need Chuck's approval for basic human decency. Guest, but where did that compass come from, Tony? Before that day on the Walker set, I was just a desperate kid who would have done anything for a career in Hollywood. Chuck showed me there were lines you don't cross, no matter what the cost. Tony, pause. So when you think about what you might find tomorrow, you're not just worried about Chuck's legacy, you're worried about your own moral foundation crumbling. Guest, exactly, Tony. If Chuck built my entire ethical framework on a foundation of murder, what does that make me? Every good decision I've made, every time I've protected someone or stood up for what's right, was that really me, or was I just following the example of a killer? Tony, Guest, you're giving Chuck too much credit and yourself too little. You were 18, not 8. You had your own sense of right and wrong before you met him. Guest, did I though, Tony? I grew up in East LA watching my older brothers get involved with gangs, seeing violence solve problems every day. When Chuck talked about justice outside courtrooms, that resonated with something I already understood. Maybe he didn't create a monster. Maybe he just refined one. Tony, you're not a monster, Guest. The fact that you're wrestling with these questions proves that. A real monster wouldn't care about the moral implications, Guest, or maybe a smart monster would care very much about appearing moral, Tony. Maybe that's what Chuck really taught me, how to be dangerous while looking righteous. Tony, listen to yourself. You're talking about walking away from millions of dollars to avoid working with an alleged predator. That's not the behavior of someone who's learned to hide their dangerous nature. Guest, unless the dangerous part isn't what I do, Tony, it's what I'm willing to accept, what I'm capable of justifying when it serves my interests. Tony, is that what you think you're doing now? Justifying Chuck's actions because they served your interests? Guest, long pause. I keep trying to separate my gratitude to Chuck from my moral judgment of what he might have done, Tony, but they're so intertwined that I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Tony, what does your wife think about all this? Have you shared any of these concerns with her? Guest, she knows I'm struggling with something, Tony, but I haven't told her the details. How do you tell the woman you love that your entire life might be built on someone else's death? That the house she lives in, the security your family enjoys, might be blood money? Tony, maybe she's stronger than you think. Maybe she could help you work through this instead of carrying it alone. Guessed, or maybe she'd look at me differently, Tony. Maybe she'd start wondering what other dark secrets I'm capable of keeping. Our marriage has survived a lot of Hollywood pressures, but I'm not sure it could survive this. Tony, guest, you're isolating yourself with this burden. That's not healthy, and it's not going to help you make better decisions tomorrow. Guest, I'm not sure I want to make better decisions, Tony. I'm not sure the morally correct choice is the right choice for everyone involved. Sometimes the greater good requires accepting some personal compromise. Tony, now you really do sound like you're rationalizing. The greater good according to whom? You? Chuck? Or the people who sent you those bloody scripts? Guest. That's what I need to find out tomorrow, Tony. Whether this has all been Chuck's plan from the beginning, or whether someone else has been pulling the strings for 28 years. Whether I'm Chuck's protege or someone else's pawn. Tony, and if you discover you've been a pawn? If this whole thing is bigger than just you and Chuck and Kellerman? Guest. Then I guess I'll finally understand why Chuck really whispered those words to me that day, Tony. And whether he was preparing me to be a victim or teaching me to be a survivor. Tony, guest, those are two very different things, being a victim versus being a survivor. What's the distinction in your mind? Guest, a victim accepts what happens to them, Tony. They let other people control their narrative, their future, their sense of who they are. A survivor takes control back, even if it means making choices that other people might not understand, Tony. But survivors can still make moral choices, guest. Surviving doesn't require abandoning your ethics. Guess, doesn't it, though? Tony, think about what survival meant in Chuck's world. He was a martial artist, an action hero, someone who solved problems with his hands when words failed. Maybe he taught me that sometimes survival means being willing to cross lines that victims won't cross. Tony, you're talking about Chuck like he was some kind of criminal mastermind, guest. From everything you've told me, he was a man who saw injustice and acted on it. Guest, and what if acting on injustice sometimes requires becoming the thing you're fighting against, Tony? What if Chuck understood that the only way to stop monsters is to become a different kind of monster? Tony, pause, guest. I'm worried about your headspace right now. You're going into tomorrow's meeting with some very dark assumptions about what strength and survival require. Guest, maybe that's what I need, Tony. Maybe I've been naive for 28 years, thinking that good intentions and moral choices are enough to protect the people you care about. Maybe Chuck was trying to teach me that real protection requires harder choices. Tony, have you considered that Chuck might have been wrong? That his approach, whatever it was, might have created more problems than it solved? Guest, every day, Tony. But then I think about that moment on set when Kellerman hit me. I think about how helpless I felt, how humiliated, how certain I was that my dreams were over. And then I think about how Chuck changed all of that with just a few whispered words. Tony, what exactly did those words do to you, guest? Beyond just removing Kellerman from your life? Guest, they made me feel powerful for the first time, Tony. Not just protected, but actually powerful. Like I had someone in my corner who would do whatever it took to make sure I succeeded. That feeling, that certainty, I've been chasing it ever since. Tony, and now you're wondering if that power came at someone else's expense. Guest, I'm wondering if that power made me complicit in something I was too young and too grateful to question, Tony. Whether Chuck gave me a gift or made me an accessory. Tony, there's still time to walk away from all this, guest. You could cancel your flight. Forget about the warehouse. Focus on building your future instead of excavating your past. Guest, could I, though? Tony, those bloody scripts aren't going away. Kellerman's body isn't going to undie. Whatever Chuck did or didn't do 28 years ago, it's catching up with me now whether I want it to or not. Tony. So you think this warehouse meeting is inevitable? Guest, I think someone wants me there, Tony. Whether it's Chuck testing my loyalty, or Kellerman's allies seeking revenge, or something else entirely, someone has been planning this moment for a long time. Tony, that's another reason to stay away, guest. If it's a trap, why walk into it? Guest, because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, Tony, wondering when they'll come for me, when they'll come for my family. At least if I face it tomorrow, I'll know what I'm dealing with. Tony. And if what you're dealing with is bigger than just you and Chuck, if this involves other people, other crimes, other victims, guest, then I'll finally understand the real scope of what I've been part of, Tony. whether I'm just one piece in a larger puzzle, or whether Chuck and I were operating alone all these years. Tony guessed, what happens if you get to that warehouse tomorrow and Chuck is waiting for you? What's the first thing you'll say to him? Guessed, long pause. I think I'll ask him if he's proud of who I became, Tony. Whether the man I am now is what he was hoping for when he whispered those words to me 28 years ago. Tony, and what if his answer isn't what you want to hear? Guessed. Then I'll know that everything I thought I understood about justice, about protection, about what it means to be strong, all of it will need to be rebuilt from scratch, Tony. And I'll have to decide if I'm brave enough to become a different kind of man than the one Chuck trained me to be. Tony, that might be the most important decision you've ever made, Guest. Guest, it might be the first real decision I've ever made, Tony. The first choice that's entirely my own, without Chuck's influence guiding me toward what he thinks is right. Tony, Guest, hearing you say that this might be your first real independent decision, that's both liberating and terrifying, isn't it? Guest, it is, Tony. For 28 years I've been making choices based on what I thought Chuck would approve of. Even when I haven't spoken to him, his voice has been there, guiding every major decision. Tomorrow, I might finally learn whether that voice was worth listening to. Tony, what scares you more, Guest? Finding out Chuck was wrong about everything or finding out he was right? Guest, long pause, finding out he was right, Tony. Because if Chuck was right about Kellerman needing to be stopped by any means necessary, then what does that say about all the other Vincent Kellermans still out there? All the powerful predators I've encountered in Hollywood who I didn't stop because I chose the legal route instead.
But what about the result for Chuck? If he's been building some kind of network of people like me, witnesses to abuse who feel grateful enough to stay silent about his methods, then I'm not his protege. I'm his accomplice.
Is that what you think you'll find tomorrow? Evidence that you're part of a larger network?
I think I'll find out whether I'm Chuck's greatest success story or his biggest disappointment, Tony. Whether I became the kind of man he was hoping to create, or whether I've been too comfortable with legal solutions to be useful to his real work.
And which outcome would be worse for you, Guest?
Being his disappointment would mean I've wasted 28 years trying to live up to the wrong example, Tony. But being his success would mean I've been unconsciously preparing for something that might destroy everything I've built. Either way, tomorrow changes everything.
Guest, what if tomorrow you discover that none of your assumptions are correct? What if the truth is simpler and stranger than anything you've imagined?
Then I'll learn that I don't know myself as well as I thought, Tony. And I'll have to decide whether the man I actually am is someone I can live with, or someone I need to change before it's too late.